the next slide is a picture of Dr. Rasselman. And then she was also on a radio program on the Finnish Broadcasting Corporation on a talk show and talked about what would Jesus think about homosexuals. All right, so she tweeted, she questioned why the church is supporting with something that the Bible calls shame and sin, and she was on radio. I do that sometimes. And then she was charged for a hate crime, and the police interrogated her for 13 hours, and they interrogated her about her biblical views and the meaning of the book of Romans. And the police prepared and released our 11-page decision. Well, when it will come up on the screen, it will come up. And the police said, well, we don't find any grounds to charge her for investigation, because they said, if you say that holding a viewpoint of the Bible is criminal, the Bible will have to be done. So the police said, we have no reason to charge her, but the state prosecutor said, we are going to trial. And that was in 2019. 2019. And 3 years of trial, criminal trial, from the Bible. She was acquitted in 2022, but the prosecutor persisted and has appealed. And so the case was heard in 2023. I see it coming up on this laptop screen, but not on the main one.
Yeah, this one has free is frozen.
That one is frozen.
Well, the arguments that the state prosecutor made were that MP Rasselman has characterized homosexuality as immoral and a psychosocial development disorder, saying that same-sex attraction is unhealthy and abnormal. This devalues and denigrates homosexuals. She's condemning homosexual acts and condemning homosexuals as human beings. There is no religious defense for that kind of hate speech. You can cite the Bible, but it's her interpretation about the Bible verses that are criminal. This is what the state is saying. But the MP says, but you don't have to agree with my beliefs to agree that in a democratic society, everybody has the freedom to speak freely. Freedom of expression and faith are guaranteed in the Constitution and every major human rights treaty. And she says, fellow Christians, that if she loses the case, anybody preaching from the Bible or publishing materials on these faith teachings with face criminal prosecution. She's willing to go as far as possible, even to the European courts of human rights, in order to preserve this freedom to preach the gospel, to speak from the Bible, and to share her opinions in society. But she said, I'm not losing the opportunity to preach the gospel. I enjoyed being interrogated by the police because then she could give Bible studies and explain her faith to the police.
Sorry?
So let me just show you the name of that's the name of the MP from Finland. She has a blog, you could just put in her name and Google it. She's keeping track of the experience and the court case. So you can look for her. How will happen in Finland. So here's a quote from a journalist who says, this is the irony of the treatment of religion. The Finnish authorities would never do this to followers of Islam. And they would never prescribe the Quran. And secularists make fun of the Bible and Christianity, but nobody carries them to jail for it. But yet, a Christian is quoting Christian scripture and is yet hauled over the coals for doing so. Look at that irony and hypocrisy. Let's go over to the United Kingdom. So last year, the members of the UK Parliament, and these are democratically elected legislators, they approved the introduction of buffer zones around abortion facilities in England and Wales. And in this public spaces protection order, they are now prohibiting distributed information about pregnancy, health services, and other activities that are considered a protest around an abortion facility. And this is what happened to this lady, Isabel Vaughn Spruce. She's a charity worker. She has helped women in crisis pregnancy over 20 years. In November last year, she was charged with protesting and engaging in an act that is intimidating the service user. Intimidating and protesting. This is what she was charged with. What did she do? Nothing. The facility is over there and she's still here. And she's praying silently. But the police came over and charged her with protesting and breaking this public protection order for simply standing in a corner. Thankfully, she was acquitted in February, but her attorney said the UK Parliament is now criminalizing your thoughts, thinking pro-life thoughts about outside of an abortion clinic, which was closed, by the way, could now end you up in jail. So they're now censoring thoughts, criminalizing peaceful activities such as silent prayer and consensual conversation. If it is over the topic of abortion today, what could it be tomorrow? If the police could come to you, stand inside and say, what are you thinking and charging me? Let's go over to Canada. But yeah, look out. There's no saying, look out, you have an opinion. You could be charged and sent to jail. Speaking truth is now considered. Let's go over to Canada quickly. This is Rob Hoogland, a brave father fighting for his daughter. That's his little daughter. When she was in about 4th or 5th grade, she started having some difficulties in school. He was working along with the school counselor to get her help, deal with depression and other mental health issues. Then in 7th grade, she discovered transgender videos. And the school also pushed transgender ideology on the children without the parents' knowledge. The father thought that she would snap out of it. But then the school socially transitioned her, meaning that she said she wanted to be a boy and she told the boy's name and the teacher and she said, yes, you can go ahead and do that. They never asked the parents, they never said anything to the parents. The parents divorced and the school put the girl's mom, who was in favor of this change, in front of the psychologist. And he wanted them to have her sign a consent form for testosterone therapy. But this little girl, she's under 18, and she's confused, thinking that she's a boy, and they want to go ahead and transition her to being a boy by giving her testosterone therapy. And here are some of the warnings on that form. It is not known what the effects of testosterone are on fertility. Even if you stop taking testosterone, you may or may not be able to get pregnant in the future. The medical effects of taking testosterone are not fully understood. Risks for girls and women include heart disease, increased blood pressure, lower good cholesterol, higher bad cholesterol, stroke, heart attack, diabetes, headaches, migraine, anger, and irritability. The father did not sign in this. The hospital said the daughter could choose to receive it, even though she's a minor. The father filed for a restraining order, went to court. The court said the 14-year-old girl should go ahead and get her testosterone injection, change her name, and if the father refused to do so, he could be charged with family violence. Well, that father was bold and courageous and would go to the end of the earth to protect his daughter. So he started to go public, warning other parents, protecting decisions, giving interviews. He was called back into court. The judge charged him with guilty of family violence, issued a protection order against him, a guard order that he must be or to be subject to arrest immediately without warrant. But he continued and he was charged and thrown in jail because he was pretending to publicly save his daughter. That was in March this year, he was put in jail, and in August, his sentence was overruled and set free, but there's still a gap order. This is what the Canadian government is now doing to override parental rights, to harm children with long-term unknown consequences and calling this family violence. Then in the UK, Gladys Leisure, Christian teacher at the Church of England School, teaching foreign languages, she refused to teach LGBT lessons which had been introduced into the RE lesson. And then she was fired because she was charged as being breaching the teaching regulations, that she is unfit to be a teacher, and she is not acting in consistent with British values. So she's not a good teacher because she didn't teach the field. I'm going to give you two more examples and then we can discuss. This is Northern Ireland. For 7 years, that gentleman, a gay man, he self-identifies as a gay man, Gary, he went to this bakery, Asher's Bakery, and wanted them to bake a cake with Ernie and Bert. Anybody remember?
Yeah.
Yes. Ernie and Bert, he wanted them on the cake with a message supporting marriage, and he chose to go to a Christian bakery. Only for bakeries are in Belfast, but he chose a Christian bakery, and they said, well, we can't because that conflicts with our religious belief. I'm sorry, perhaps you should go to another bakery. He insisted, and then had them charged for breaching his human rights as a gay man. And this case was for 7 years, went all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. And he wanted to keep them paid for refusing his offer of seeking services. But the European Court of Rights said that his claim was not accepted because of the facts of the case. He was not treated differently from anybody else, his real or perceived sexual orientation, but rather that the refusal to supply the cake was because the defendant's religious objection was to marriage, not to him as a person, but to the message that he was asking them to use their creativity to communicate. And then finally, now another example in the USA, he's an online Christian preacher in Oklahoma. He was ordered by a judge to stay silent on state social media for 5 years after he expressed on his online post his moral and religious concerns that about a church that was supporting same-sex marriage and a public drag queen performance in front of children. You know what the drag queens were meant to say? Mocking of women, of parents, and the church. A church was supporting this, and he was expressing his opinion. And the judge said that he needs to be silent on social media. There was no evidence that he contacted the LGBT group. There was no discussion with them. He didn't issue any threats. There was no proof that he was inciting violence or anything like that. He was simply expressing his opinion online. And yet one of those LGBT persons could say, I feel offended, and have a judge issue a 5-year silence order on this man. But he thankfully is taking legal action. So these are some examples. There are many, many more. They have become public. There are probably others that haven't. Christians obedient to living out their faith and the freedom which they thought they had have come into conflict with the law of the nation that's no longer reflecting Christian values. And they're now being seen and treated as enemies of the state and society. They're being punished because they're chosen not to worship false gods, but the one true God. And Christians having to go to court to defend this right and freedom. So how did we get there? How did we get there? I'm going to say there are 3 things in particular. One is first, the law changed. So, for example, entering the word hate speech as a ground for taking action. Now, you might think hate speech is some sort of communication that would attack or use violence against a group of people, or that would incite violence. That sounds fair enough. But there's no universal definition as to hate speech. It's up to each nation, each legislature. But what has made these ordinary words particularly now dangerous is because of the introduction of this phrase, sexual orientation and gender identity. And wherever these terms turn up, in law, in human rights treaties, in human rights language, in any law, it is saying that these persons who say that their orientation is a certain way, or that their identity is a particular way, they should not be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. What does that mean, sexual orientation, gender identity? Sexual orientation is who I'm attracted to, what they say, whomever I am attracted to.
Mhm.
And my identity is whomever I feel I am, regardless of the biological reality. So even if my genes say XX, and your genes will always say XX, even if they dig up your bones 1,000 years from now, they will be able to know that you are male or female. But if I feel that I'm otherwise, you should go by what I feel and not what reality is. That's the effect of those two phrases, sexual orientation and gender identity. But I want you to let you know so that you can be confident in challenging wherever you may see these terms come up. This is fake science. It's not rooted into a bare life. There's no evidence anywhere that anybody can be born gay, or you are male but in a female body, or female in a male body. That is a figment of someone's imagination. These two gentlemen, Dr. Paul Matthew and Dr. Lawrence Mail, top of their field as epidemiologist, biostatistician, and leading psychiatrist, and they reviewed hundreds of peer-reviewed articles. And they said that there is no scientific evidence to support this idea of your orientation being different from your biology, or that you can claim an identity that is different from your biology. What they found is that there may be teenagers feeling confused, which may happen in the teenage years. But even if a teen says, you know, I'm feeling gay or I'm feeling trans, if you do not encourage it, don't go down that path, they will grow out of it. Certainly we give support and run alongside them, but we don't confirm the lie, because what you're doing is you're aiding and abetting a mental illness. And most people grow out of it. Most persons grow out of it. But I also want you to know some history that is very, very important to understand. And this morning, actually, in the Supreme Court, you would have heard about the Buggery Law Challenge, where a gay man, Maurice Tomlinson, has challenged the government, saying that his rights, his constitutional rights as a gay man, are being infringed by this law that prohibits anal penetration, aka buggery. And this morning, the Court of Appeal is to, at 10 o'clock, issue their decision on whether the case should proceed or whether the law has been saved or protected from challenge because of the savings law clause. When we became independent in 1962, there were a certain set of laws that were said to be unchallengeable, and those are laws relating to sexual offenses, the life of the unborn, and obscene publication. Those laws must stay as they were pre-1962. And we have argued that this is a good law, it still is of value and relevance, it was saved, it should not be challenged. Mr. Tomlinson is saying it must be challenged. So this morning, the court at 10 o'clock is to issue their ruling, and we are afraid that truth will prevail and rational, legal thinking. But you need to understand, in any of this debate dealing with LGBT, that at the root, at the history of it, are these two personalities, Dr. Alfred Kinsey and Dr. John Money. Alfred Kinsey is called the father of the sexual revolution. In the 1940s, he put out this in the 1950s, sexual behavior in human male and human female. And he made the claim that what was previously socially accepted as aberrant sexual behavior, so fornication, adultery, pedophilia, homosexuality, rape, all of those things, that actually is happening more often than thought. It's so common that society should change its values and the law should change its values to allow these things that were once called abnormal and aberrant. And he had a whole heap of data in his books, and he was coming from the University of Indiana, and it was backed with money from the Rockefeller Institute, and it was accepted and traveled around, and people say, oh, it must be true science. But when it was discovered that his data was actually being drawn from questionable sources, he was really interviewing prostitutes and sex offenders, not the ordinary American. And he made a claim that children are sexual from birth. And in that, those tables 31 to 34, he has listed children from as young as 2 months up to 14 years. And he claimed this as evidence of their sexuality, that they had orgasms. But if you read the document, and many people don't read it, it was actually children being raped, not 2 months, 14 years. Screams, fainting, convulsions, fighting off the adults, shaking, trembling. This is what he called orgasm. but it was evident abuse of children, hundreds of children abused. And this is used as scientific data to justify allowing persons, regardless of their sexual desire, to be accepted as normal and absorbed. The sick man, he himself was bisexual, he himself was practiced pornography, a lot of perversion, and yet he's upheld as a scientist in the field of sexuality. The next person, Dr. John Money, he coined the term sexual orientation and gender identity. He promoted sex reassignment surgery. So he came with the idea that it doesn't matter what you're born with, you could be raised as the opposite. And he is known for great damage to this young boy, Bruce David Reimer, a twin. You can look this up on YouTube, his story is on YouTube. His circumcision was botched, his genitalia needed to be repaired, his parents went to Dr. Money. He said, why don't you just raise him as a girl? Just raise him as a girl. So he reconstructed his genitalia, and the parents foolishly followed it. So they raised him as a girl and the twin brother as a boy. But that child had no end of mental challenges. And finally, when he was 15, the parents told him, and he immediately went back to living as a boy. But what happened, and they did not know, was that when they had the appointments with Dr. Money would make him and the brother strip naked and make them pretend to have sex with each other, and he would shout at them and take pictures of them, really, really abuse them. And that trauma was so, he was unable to recover from that both he and his brother eventually committed suicide. But you can watch this on video. But this man, John Money, became famous. He was known as being the first doctor who was able to successfully transition a boy to being a girl, and that can be done. And this was at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, USA. Finally, the truth came out, and that clinic was shut down, but not before these sick men and were able to influence so many through their perversion. And that changed laws, policies, and educational curricula, and even some church doctrines. Let me tell you that every single legal challenge against the Bubbly law or the Southern law anywhere in the world, it will be based on Alfred Kinsey's laws. When you look in the arguments of the cases, you will see references to previous cases, whether it's in the US or in the UK. The UK Bubbly law was dismantled because of this man's lies. The commission that set up to repeal the Bubbly law in the UK in the 1950s cited Dr. Kinsey. The US, Texas, Lawrence in Texas, in the 1990s, it cited Alfred Kinsey, and you will see the stream of cases, citing. Same thing in Trinidad, same in Jamaica, same thing in Cayman, same thing in Belize. Alfred Kinsey and John Money are at the root of this tree that we have to contend with and to cut down. But just know that his life is life. Anybody come and tell you that it is normal? It is not. Alfred Kinsey and John Money are at the root of it. So what are some of the fruits and the results of John Money and Alfred Kinsey? Is the attempts to repeal the Bubbly laws and to put this term, sexual orientation and gender identity. So imagine if this term was to be put into our Charter of Rights. Our Charter of Rights would say that you have the freedom to, you have the right to be free from discrimination, being male and female. You and I can apply for the same job. We should be hired on merit. Not because you're male or female or where you live or your political opinions. But what if our charter was to be changed? It isn't. But what if it was to be changed to say you shouldn't be discriminated on who you're attracted to sexually and who you feel you are? So suppose you have a policy in your office that you should dress a certain way, and a man comes to work dressed as a woman and say, "I want to dress that way." And you say, "But no, you have to dress a certain way because it's the policy of the office." And they say, "You feel discrimination against me because of my gender identity." So what happened in Ireland with the cake? They have the words sexual orientation and gender identity in their laws in Ireland. They have the word sexual orientation and gender identity in their laws in Finland. They have the word sexual orientation and gender identity in the laws in Canada. They have the word sexual orientation and gender identity in the laws in the UK. This facilitated that change and using the law to criminalize or to punish the Christians for simply holding a position. We don't want that to come into our laws in Jamaica. So that's one thing, changing the laws. How else did we get here? I would say that there is this increasing tolerance to liberal sexual attitudes and practices. And we just get very relaxed all the time, doing line, keep moving. I would also say that spread of pornography also has an effect because it distorts the mind and your ideas about intimacy. And when children are looking at porn as sex education, it's distorted. It affects the brain, certainly. Hijacking is like a drug, and the effect is like crack cocaine, so it is addictive. But it's selling children lies and telling girls that their bodies are to be used and abused for the pleasure of others and not for them to have value in themselves. So the spread of pornography is an unspoken form. I would also say that part of the history is that Playboy Empire started by Hugh Hefner. He was also influenced by Kinsey. He read Kinsey's books and said, I'm going to be Kinsey's pamphleteer. I'm going to spread this word. And so he started the Playboy Empire. He said, Kinsey died. What else did we get here? I would say also, tragically, silence and passivity of the Christian church. Seeing what is happening in the culture and saying, well, we just have to adjust. No, church, we are to transform the culture, not the culture transform us. Letting culture reform our mandated role of being light and salt in society, not at all. And here is a stark warning from recent history. What happened in Nazi Germany? People think that it just happened. It didn't. It was a slow creep. People didn't just arrive on the scene. Germany just didn't commit Holocaust just so. It was a slow and definitive creep. And there were Christian churches in Germany, and some spoke up and some didn't.
Yeah.
But what did they do when the signs were being shown? Did they speak up? Did they contend? Did they confront? And this book, Hitler's Cross, says that how Hitler crushed the church in Germany is that he had banned the prayer, he changed the Christian holidays into pagan festivals, he eventually forced the church leadership to accept his outrageous demands. His political machine swallowed the church whole because the church had lost its biblical mission. The church was controlled by the state. It is possible for an action to be legal yet tomorrow, but if there's no law above the state, if God is no longer seen as above the state, and the state will be what it issues. And so we cannot allow this to happen. Do you want this to happen here? No. Church leaders? Is this the kind of government that you want to live under? Please know that efforts are already underway to undermine your role and face and voice in society. Efforts are underway to make Jamaica vulnerable to the same threats that those colleagues in the West are facing. There's an agenda with foot soldiers, internal and external. We have to be aware to act. So, for example, yes, Jamaica is culturally Christian. Our legal system is predominantly influenced by Judeo-Christian principles, long may it be so. But are you aware that the recently released draft guidelines for devotions in school by the Ministry of Education and Youth lacked Christian references and actually was watering down Christianity and seeking to equate Christianity with salt reading cards and all sorts of occultic practices? Thankfully, some Christians became alert and approached the ministry and challenged what they had, and now there's going to be a review. But that could have just simply been passed into practice in school, and you find yourself locked up. Do you know that the civil servant staff orders have the word sexual orientation in it from 2005? Don't know what it is in there, it doesn't even have a definition. But it is in there saying that no civil servant should be discriminated on the grounds of gender, age, religious beliefs, political affiliation, sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Did you hear about what happened at Avondale Prep? This is Britannia Road in Kingston, where you see that sign there, that is up at the visitor bathroom in the school, male, female, and whatever you feel like. That happened last month, thanks to Dr. Daniel Thomas from Love March Movement, who saw a mom who put on TikTok where she posts out the principal for how her son was being treated. Apparently, the little boy would go to the boys' bathroom and other boys would push it open to watch him. And when he came, complained to the teacher, she run him off and, oh, what, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And the mother got mad. And she said she don't want no kind of words in her, against her son or at that school. And she went on TikTok. And then Love March saw it and made a little video and we sent it on to the children to Africa. But this happening in a school, primary school in Kingston. Then you know about the constitutional reform and legal reform. You have to be alert, church, because what could be brought in under constitutional reform? You would have heard about the Capri report back in 2021. Capri is that research institute up at UWI, where they had recommended that there be a secret conscience vote by the parliamentarians to decriminalize abortion, and that girls under 16 should be allowed to get abortions without their parents knowing. That was what their recommendation was. Thankfully, it has not gone further, but that was put out by a think tank. You would have heard about the UWI gender policy, where UWI is wanting to bring in as a policy for all the campuses, the accepting or rejecting the reality that men and women are different, physically and psychologically, and wanted to punish those who believe in binary, male or female, and then to require anybody doing business with UWI to sign up to this kind of lies. And then we know that there are private companies like Lena, who are very much pro-LGBT. Yeah. And in April this year, they put in one of the comic strips, a lesbian wedding in the comic strip, yes, in April this year. And then I told you about the court case. And then we know about the provocation by foreign governments, for example, the US Embassy that flies the flag of shame in June. And we've also been told that they also are approaching our guidance counselors and giving them trips to the US to instruct them on how they can create safe spaces in schools and make it welcoming for LGBT. So church, for us to not end up there, before I close, for us to not end up there, it requires action and discipline. We cannot afford to be passive or to be silent. This is our freedom that we're talking about, to hold church and to speak the gospel. So what will we do? This is a worldview battle. There is no middle ground. You have to take a side. It's either truth or lies. It's either what the Bible says or what human desire dictates. We have to choose whom we will serve. Well, we want to serve the Lord. We want to serve the Lord. So this is what I would say to you as church leaders. First of all, to know your own worldview. What's your position on some of these controversial issues? You'd be surprised that there are many nice Christian people who actually haven't thought about the implications and they just go with the buzzwords that are around in society. Well, love is love, they love each other. Okay, well, what does that mean? Have you thought about the implications of what that means? And if
what's the name?
Called to speak God's command as to about
okay, what's the name?
And our behavior and our relationship, then there is a path that we ought to take and we want to encourage others to take. Preaching the gospel. We must preach the gospel. All have sinned. And persons who say they feel attracted to a person of the same sex, understand that many of these persons, they might have experienced childhood sexual abuse. Some of them have watched pornography and that influences. They might have experimented, or there may have been some other trauma. They not feel like they're fitting in with family, or they have a poor relationship with dad or mom, but then the trauma is then sexualized. So they're using sex to deal with a trauma that's something else is unrelated. And then because sex is addictive, then they find themselves going on a path, but the trauma still remains. So we don't come with condemnation. We come with compassion, we come with grace, but never letting go of the truth. That person needs help, they need to be taken to professional counseling, but to understand that some of the root causes, many of them lie in childhood abuses or in trauma. We're to teach the whole counsel of God, and that includes good design for humankind, marriage and family. And so you need to prepare your congregations to rebuild the pillars of family in Jamaica, rebuild the pillars of marriage, defend the pillars of family, faith, and freedom, and expect persecution. Expect persecution. Paul warned us that if we want to live godly in Christ, if there is no persecution, Jesus said, all will be hated for my sake. So expect it. It may come like you losing friends. Maybe it might be as mild as losing friends. Or you might actually lose your job over it, or have to choose a different employment. Or we hope not that we lose our lives, but for Christ's sake, for the glory of the Lord. But expect persecution. We heard the story of a Seventh-day Adventist pastor in the middle of the island, who was a JP at an event where the cluster was present, and he spoke very strongly and clearly to say, thus saith the Lord, and we're not supporting lies and shame. And the customs called him out and said, you speak like that again, or else you will lose your commission. He said, well, keep the commission, I keep the gospel. So if it comes to come to that, prepare your mind and readiness for this practice. Continuous prayer, and we must keep praying in public. So it doesn't go out of style. We must maintain that freedom to gather in a public space and to call on the name of the Lord, to say the name Jesus in public, and we must keep it so we don't lose that freedom and that opportunity. And be present in school. Perhaps you've heard of Operation Safe Jamaica. They run street pastors. They've now started school pastors, and they would love to train persons across the island. Perhaps you can reach out to them, Pastor Bruce Fletcher at Operation Safe Jamaica. But we need to be present in school. Present in school. And we need to engage with children to teach them to think and argue well. It's not enough to say the Bible says so. And it's not enough to say I said so. We need to teach them to think, because the other side is coming with arguments that will engage thought. But we have to teach them to discern lies, to ask questions, and respond confidently with the truth. We have to teach our children to think and to defend it confidently. We need to be alert. What's happening in your office policies? I know several of the foreign banks in Jamaica have wanted to introduce sexual orientation and gender identity into their office manual. You have to be alert. Banks, any of the transnationals that work in Jamaica. What's happening at school? You would have heard maybe about Excelsior High School, where this group called Ending Period Poverty came in to speak to the girls, and they gave them out the goodie bag. And in the bag was a pro-transgender booklet, and a mom saw it at home and came back, and the principal was horrified because she never gave permission for that to be circulated. She sent out a letter to all the parents, and the girls had to bring those books back, and she went back to the organization and said, what is it? I never gave you permission to come and indoctrinate my students. You were to come and talk about the biological function of women or experiences of girls. So you have to be alert and look what's in the school library. We saw in a bookstore, I won't say where, a bookstore in Kingston, and they were selling a pro-trans book, telling children how to use the different pronouns and how to come out square to their friends and their family. We have to be alert. We have to be alert. And finally, we must resist and reject these attempts to establish the lies in law and policy. So we wait to hear what the decision is from the court, but should they rule unfavorably, the battle is not over. Actually, it is ramping up. We cannot remain silent. I want to recommend to you as a resource a documentary that our group JCHS did. It's on our website, and you can also go to the YouTube channel, Sex, Lies, and Rights, that summarizes what I've spoken about today with some of the examples from overseas. And then on the right, Rebuilding the Wall is like a training toolkit, a manual that we prepare to equip the church to understand the issues and to be able to respond. And so it can be for personal reading, or it could be used for group study or Bible study. It's laid out. It's a very simple, slim, easy volume to read, Rebuilding the Wall Against the Storm, on our website. And there are 12 modules. We look at Alfred Kinsey, I mentioned this morning. We look at marriage, sex, and the brain. It has a lot of information from neuroscience, from history, from anthropology, so that you're able to use the evidence of God's truth from the natural sciences, social sciences, the physical sciences. Stable families, the future of the church. We list out frequently used arguments. Arguments that the LGBT activists use are few and repeated. So if you're aware of them, you're able to decipher what they're saying and then how to respond. There are frequently asked questions. 10 steps, the letter of the day is how to engage in writing into the newspaper, whether it's calling on the radio program, but it's to get the church speaking and being confident to engage in the marketplace, in the public space. You wanted me to go back and show, this is the website, jchs.org.jm, and it's called Rebuilding the Wall Against the Storm. It's free for you to download, but please do use it, either personal or in group study. So that's just a snapshot of how it looks like, the layout of discussion, scriptural references, commentary, the big idea, think about it, questions for discussion, application, and if there are any words that are new, we'll give the glossary as well, and additional resources. So I recommend it for your review and for your use. And finally, let me say that it's beyond LGBT, this battle that we're engaged in. Because if we are silent about what is so obvious and so good about God's design for the flourishing of humankind, male and female, marriage, children, family, if we're silent on what's so obvious, how are we going to defend the gospel against the lives of Islam? And this is what we have found in countries like the UK, where they were so silent on what ought to be obvious, and the LGBT agenda just silenced Christians, that they now find themselves battling to confront Islam because they were trained to be silent. They were trained to censor themselves. They're trained not to offend. We won't speak the truth because we don't want to question the God's glory. But we have to speak up the light. And Islam is on a march to proselytize the world. And we know this to be so. So it is beyond just LGBT church. It's about the truth of the gospel. It's about preserving our freedom to keep church and to live out in peace our Judeo-Christian beliefs. This is global. This is not only Jamaica. It includes Jamaica. And it goes beyond just LGBT. And it goes beyond Islam either. This is a battle from Genesis 3 to now. Ancient holy war between God and the devil, between truth and lies. And church, we must be found faithful. When Christ returns, we must be found faithful. Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippa, one more time for sharing. Yes, thank you, Philippa. It is always good to have you share. Firstly, is it possible to get a summarized version of that presentation so that we can share, and I'm sure others will be reaching out to you in their local spaces to share that. You have covered, and if there are any questions, you can hear them, how it will impact our church, and if you had put in some things in terms of what we can do, but if you could give us 2 or 3 real current practical things that a corporate entity we should be doing or should be doing.
Pray and pray again and prepare your children. I've been surprised when even going back to my old school in Kingston, just to talk about some of the issues. The hostility, and this is a Christian school, the hostility from the students, some of the students, but also how articulate they are in defending the lie. And they believe it so because, they've been caught. This is the buzzword, this is the cause to defend of their generation. So I was very surprised how articulate they are, informed in the lie, and defending it so passionately. And I said, well, then those have been factored into the restaurant, the prey and the children, because they will be used against you, you know. They will tell you that you come with your old antiquated Bible, views and your old generation, you don't know what, right? But they are the next generation of voters, huh? So prey and the children.
All right, are there anyone? Direct question, yes, between.
I just want to say, thank God for you and for this great conference. This is some of my long desire. I have started last year. I am dealing with St. Primary School, St. James. Because St. James is a community at church. And when I went into some schools, all actually come. That's no minister going to them. And I'm very grateful for the conference of letting me know that I have greater opportunity. When it comes to street meeting, people ask, when are you coming? One young man said last week, I want to keep up. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Sounds great on your point? Yes. Okay. So I am to say thank you. Because that was, I'm not doing the formal work, but I really appreciate the quality of the output. I think we do have an accused challenge over in the church. Because we are careful to identify the challenges. However, there seems to be not sufficient readiness on our part beyond just the moral aspect to do our job, which is the proclamation of the gospel, which is often equated with just general evangelization. And I believe, and I'm just saying it to you, since you're facilitating, but in a general sense, church, body, I'm thinking that we have more homework to do than just agitate against the moral ills and the things that we have discovered. I believe there's a lack of understanding, hence a lack of clear proclamation of the gospel that puts us at a disadvantage, that even if we were to win the moral battles, we're still, it's like fighting against something but have no recourse. And I think this is something that as a church, we really have to zero in on, right? It's like saying to a young man, don't go that path. But while you're doing that, you're not presenting in a systematic and careful way what substitute. So this is something I think we are to unpack and explore a little bit more.
Thank you very much. It's important to say why this is God's design for male-female marriage parenting. Why is it good? Say why it is good. We're presenting an alternative, but say this was the natural order, and this is why it's good. We point out what is wrong, but say what is good. Say what is good. So if you look in the book that I told you, Rebuilding the Wall, we have information there about marriage and parenting. We put statistics, and this is social sciences information about why marriage is good for society. Society that have high rates of marriage have lower rates of crime and child abuse and stronger economy. Countries or societies with low marriage have high rates of crime, especially with the single men between 16 to 30. So there is economic economic benefits and low crime benefits, promoting God's design for family. Yeah? Thank you.
Let me also express my my gratitude for this certification. I believe in my opinion, it was well communicated to the cohort of pastors. Now, I want to see two things quickly, which I might be putting a good note with youthful exuberance. But I know that you have said that we should pray and prepare the next generation who is the lawmakers and legislators who is to come. And I take notice with that. Yeah, and they're the next voters. Well, that may seem like too long-term plans. And we have to prepare for the future. The reality of it is that one of the downfalls that we have as pastors is that we have moved away from Christian apologetics. We no longer want to defend the faith. And we can defend the faith within the four walls, which we have 100 people who will look up to us as pastors and think that we are the leaders. We can defend it in the church first. But when the other denominations are having this march against abortion, this march against homosexuality, we don't go. It's about denomination. We don't go to this march. And so we have moved away for one reason or the other. And until we are able to sit down and conceptualize what is it that we're doing and how is it that we're going to come together and fight this battle, it's nonsense, right? I mean, we're going to pray, yes, with the hope, but faith without works is dead. And unless you're willing to do the work as people who are called to defend, then no, we're not. In the correctional facilities, they're there. They're treated better. Well, and until we are ready to dissect that and ask the questions to the relevant authority, why and how, the reality of it is that we're not ready. And I know we have a question. Well, I don't have a question. I don't have a question. The second, yeah man, we know we have an issue. And probably that's why we don't get far with many of these, because we want to brush over these things. And that's there. The final point is that we're looking at how did we get here. What I've recognized over the last 4 or 5 years is that one of the ways that we seep into the church community and the Christian foundation is by nature of funding. That the funders who are willing to fund the Christian-driven organization have some underlying motive. And if those are not spread across. So when I was working at a foundation in Kingston, I was told as a project officer that the only way that we can get funding from the funders who are external is that unless we're able to put our form in a way where we can accommodate the art. That alone degenerates the value of principles. So unless we are called to defend it.
And to understand two things, that this is pernicious, insidious, they will look through any opportunity and forward. And they know that the church is the biggest block to advancing this agenda. Minister Chuck said the same thing when they came to him from the US Embassy and asked, why don't you repeal the Booker law? He said to them, you want church to kill me? And those are his words, not mine. Because they know in Jamaica that church is an important constituency. But they will try to undermine it from within. So, for example, the HIV/AIDS sensitization programs, they want to include, and they do, faith-based organizations. And part of their policy description is to get groups, including faith-based, to weaken or to deal with the stigma and discrimination against persons of HIV/AIDS. Stigma and discrimination is a known code word for them, the activists, to use to remove any objection to homosexual behavior. Now, understand, homosexuality is not illegal in Jamaica. That's identity. It's how you feel. I can't put in law how you must feel or don't feel. The law is concerned with your behaviors and how it affects society. So being homosexual is not illegal. It's a homosexual act or the behavior of buggery that is prohibited in law, whether you're male or female. So stigma and discrimination, if I say homosexual behavior is wrong, it leads to disease and death, you should not engage in it. They will say I'm stigmatizing and discriminating, and they want church to buy on to stigma and discrimination. If you say I will hire you to do the job because you have HIV/AIDS or you have AIDS, that would be stigma and discrimination for the job. But in terms of your behavioral choice, I must have a dividing line between right and wrong, normal and abnormal, and be able to hold to that view. So be careful when you want to engage you as a faith-based organization and look for those code words: stigma and discrimination, equality, diversity, and inclusivity, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Binary is good. Binary means one or male or female. But they want to say other is. Is that remember?
Yeah.
Here we go.
They want to remove the battery.
Good. I have a problem. I don't know how much of us. Taking this alphabet thing. But I have the opportunity to travel. And I see things on a different line. And I'm coming to my question. All right. I remember I was in Canada, downtown Toronto, with my wife. We were in the park. And two men and a dog. They had a dog. They came. And it's a big park, you know? And they came right in front of me and mine with the dog. And the reason why I didn't challenge them was a big man. So,
Yeah, I mean, what?
I'm not used to this. I hear about it, but I'm
Then
used
they
to
are
it.
going to
And these two men held hands and kissed in front of me and my wife. And I said to my wife, I'm ready to go back home. Ready to go back home to Jamaica. No. I'm not used to it. No. My question, right? How was the church? How was the church? What advice in terms of education? How do we deal with this? Because I also do construction, and I had a problem there, a challenge in employing a worker because she's a lesbian. And I didn't want to employ her. But the good spirit in me said, you know what? How are you going to talk to her? How are you going to get close to her to know what is happening? And so I employed her. And employing her, I learned to do some things that led her to listen. Another thing, one last one. I was at church at the crusade. Well, crusade was hot. This pastor came and he came with an entourage. But one of the man wrist broke, but you understand what I'm saying?
Fish.
All right. So the wrist broke, but
he was very feminine. He was very feminine. I'm just talking about the mindset that we can have. We are Christian people, we are pastors, but we have a mindset towards a certain reality of what we're facing. So, and this man was wonderful singer, wonderful worshiper. And at the end of the service, they called me to the altar for them to pray for me. And this man touched me. And it's like when it's time to came up and I said, no, cheaper. My mind was even blocked spiritually. So I mean, in terms of educating on how do we deal with, because this is a reality. This is not something that is moving away from the church. This is something that is coming. This is something that is coming in. This is something that is happening. Whether we want to believe it yes or no, we have to be educated about how we treat these people, because they are people, right? They are not them and those, and they are people, and God has called us to love them and to minister to them. But we have some sin.
I would not know anything about anybody's sex life unless they tell me or their desires and preferences. So it should not be the basis for employment or just engagement in life. But the problem with this, and it's a political agenda, because it wants to change the laws and policies and culture, is that they are bringing to the public for everybody to know their bedroom. So when they say the law should not be in the bedroom, the law is everywhere, in your garage, in your bedroom, or wherever behavior takes place. But they want to bring their bedroom and parade it in public, and then for society to approve and accept it, and that's the big challenge. You don't see any other activity or behavior that is immoral being paraded in this way for us to change and accept it as being immoral. I wanted to add, though, that because this is a political agenda with a lot of passion, but then it will have the kind of drive of a religion. So they will have religious fervor to change your thinking, to teach your children, to transform the society. It is a spirit, it is a demonic spirit, right? And absolutely, I agree with the pastor. They're human beings too. All have fallen short. Each person has a different weakness and a particular sin that has an explosive impact in your life. And like I said, for many of them, there's something that happened in childhood or a trauma that needs healing and deliverance. But guess what? We have a lot of ex-gays. We have a lot of former lesbians. We have people who were, such were some of you, called as were written, but they've now been changed and transformed. So the same gospel applies. And we must bring them with that good news as well. Yeah.
For this wonderful presentation. What I think I believe is that I believe that the enemy would not want to have a lot more of you in a space like this. Because what happens is that a lot of us may hear the presentation, but because it is not close to home, we ignore it, right? But the reality is that what happened, and this is my 2 cents, I believe that the person in the LGBT, the alphabet community, those who are gays, those who are lesbians and transgender and all of these things, I honestly believe that there are a lot of them who want to feel love and want love, but they can't go to the church. And they can't go to the church because the church unconsciously is speaking and condemnation of them. No, condemnation does not mean that we are against the lifestyle. We are against homosexuality because it's not what God intended. This is my own conviction. What happens if you are homosexual, a lesbian, someone who is transgender, seek our church and wants to get sick in the church, right? And listen to the word. Yeah, but the challenge is that a lot of us will say, yeah, man, they can come. Really? I believe that a lot of us will begin to scoff at them. And because we scoff at them, they don't return. So our approach ought to be one of love. Our approach ought to be one of repetition. One of the other things I believe in our close this, that I believe we are ignoring. I believe that the Holy Spirit is grieved and disrespectful. Why do I say that? Once the word of we can't change nobody. We as individuals can't change nobody as believers. It's going to take the power of the word and the power of the Holy Spirit. I honestly believe that if we continue to teach the word like you are doing, and depending on the Holy Spirit, allow the Holy Spirit to will be transforming, then we will begin to see change. One of the things that we are doing, we do that we try to reason out a lot of things and ignore the power that the Holy Spirit possesses and can do. All we need to do is teach the truth, what you are preaching, to word that you are preaching, allow the Holy Spirit to contribution, no transformation.
So good morning, I greet this conference. I must applaud you for enlightening us on this critical topic. But I am really educated to go back to work along with my husband to see how we can educate our congregation and the signs to look for. But one of the things I really take into consideration, yes, you're facing the reality and it's affecting our church, but in light of that, we say, we're in ministry, we're not going to take on these people, it's illegal against the biblical law, but we still have to know how we treat these people. One thing we need to know is a very strong influential spirit. And if we create influence, we have to see the system, how to deal with this. Because it will, in a minute of a second, it will take over the entire church. I had one son, and I was so skeptical watching him in terms of Prophet claim I am a miserable, but I stand for what is right. I was very interested in what he was watching on the phone and watching where one is concerned, and I always been so alert just to bring him to the right way. So as ministers, we are not going to treat them with any disrespect, but we still have to know how to welcome them with open hands. The spirit of wisdom, ask God to give us wisdom to know how to deal with the situation, because as I said, it's very strong, it's catchy, it's easy. Like when you have the wood and you already years ago you like the wood. It just takes us time to bring back the fire alive. So that's how it is. That's how I see things. I may not be right, but that's a word of caution.
So please again, look at the book that we wrote. We wrote it for the Christian believers and church to use. Rebuilding the wall. It's a toolkit, it's a training kit. So please do make use of that. Really available resource.
Thank you, Ms. Davies. It's good that we have you and happy that you came. And Ms. Melissa Williams will do the vote of thanks. I just want to say to us that church and as a people, I'm sensitive that we have to break down the wall. There's a wall of faith that we have to break down when it comes down to the people, because the people
God loves the people. You know what? We have to look at our sin as sin. We put up with other sin. We put up with fornication. We put up with adultery. But we hate the homosexual. Still sin. Now tell me that we don't hate them. You might not. Some of us do. I can hear it from you. Come on. But you see, I don't know. One of these days we have to get you again and to talk again. Because I believe one of the worst things that happened to human race is that group of people that call that term the feminists. They are the dangerous people to the world. Radical. And even in the UN, there is this Slater. This lady Slater wrote a book about standing for the family. She has to be defending the family and then cut her off in a UN. You idiot, they coming to talk about family. It's big. The WHO syllabus for sexual education in school starts at 0. That's what they say, it's 0. So from your baby born, you must speak about sex and how to touch each other, male or female. It's big out there. So we need to understand it, but we have to understand that we are influenced by sin, and we are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. We are to love them, but hate what they do. Just like, oh, you love the man, you know, say, a fornicator, but you hate the sin. So we must treat all sin equally. Let us get there. If not, we're going to lose our grandchildren. We won't lose our children anymore. For all I know, my child is an adult. And she's taking our ways already. But we will lose our grandchildren and some of us our children. So let us educate them and give them what they need. All right.
It's true what you say about radical feminism and the gender ideology. It's like the new Pharaoh set to destroy the seed. It's making boys and men feel like they're worthless simply because they're male, and destroying them and crushing them and then destroying them. That's half your society. So it's true to point out what the gender ideology and radical feminism is. But look back on that story of Pharaoh destroying the seed. Yeah? So thank you for that.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I have to give my church to give the entire church a deeper understanding of how to comprehend and manage what is going on. But what I'm going to say is not meant to be confrontational or to point a finger against anyone. But as a Christian, I do understand there is a prescription of God, Jesus, telling how and who we are to love. We are not just to love anyone. There is a protocol. What I do believe, we are to respect everyone. I believe this love and here is from those people that start to talk about here. And love. I believe as Christians, we are supposed to respect everyone. I believe as Christians, we are supposed to have an equal standing for everyone. But don't you dare tell me to love everyone. That's just, it's not going to work. No, I'm going to respect you. But don't tell me to come tolerate you and then no, and also love work.
Love does not mean tolerate.
All right.
No, let me go to that.
Towards God.
Yes. So really and truly, I am just saying, when we hear somebody put a word out there and we use a counter word, be careful how they start framing our thinking by telling us what to love and try to demonize us if we will say something. But really and truly, it's not a matter we didn't hear you. We just don't like what you're doing.
All right. Announcement here, because we are asked to clear the rooms, not here, the rooms that we are in, by because the people who coming in by 11. So those of you who did not take it, you need to do so now. Don't everybody knows what's going on. And okay. Short is all right, then. I just want to make one little bit finisher.
foundation in place, but oftentimes we are misguided about all types of sin. That's true. But I want to challenge everyone inside here that there is no pastor or Christian that is very positive in our covenant adoption. And they it is right, I am always doing it. And other people. So there's a distinction and we need to do well. Love them, yes, but we have to be very careful. These guys are repentant and they are angry, they are aggressive, and they are the one influencing this parenting our children. No pastor goes school and tell them that's right and whatever. So that's just the distinction I want to make. All right.
The vote of thanks we have to close now because I said last night, and I say it again. Because sometimes we use the word loose, very loosely as Christian. We don't even understand its biblical understanding. The Bible says, for God so loved the world. And if you read 1 Corinthians 13, you tell that love suffers long and is sad. I need to be. I don't want to get into all of that. What of thanks.
Alright, so I think my job here is quite easy because a lot of persons do not express their gratitude for you being here, for you taking the time out, and I must say I've learned a lot. And it is a big topic, so I won't add to it, I'll definitely take your number. But we want to say thank you so much, Philippa David. You're my cousin, by the way. I am David's by blood, but William's by marriage. So we just want to say thank you so much, and you are a blessing towards us, and you will be able. So thank you so much. Alright.
Yes. And you need to get in touch with her, she know with her number. I know to get in touch with her. Reverend Miracle know to get in touch with her. You don't want to hear her talking about Shah. You don't want to hear her talking about Shah. All right. Now, yeah, you hear her again. We definitely have her back at conferences, definitely have her again. Amen. And any program that she and I will be on, I'll let you know. Amen. Come, Reverend Robinson, with your report time.